Hi, It Girls. We're back with another episode of the It Girls Guide. Today, it's going to be a little different. One, because we have Puck here. We'll see if he wants to join, but, he doesn't have opposable thumbs and he can't talk. But we're going to do things a little differently, and we're going to do a little Q&A. So my producer, Anthony, is here, and so he's going to be reading some of the questions.
Hello.
And I do these Ask Me Anythings on my Instagram stories relatively often, typically when I see if I get a few new followers and whatnot. And whenever I do that, there's always some more personal questions that get thrown in there. And I'm a pretty open book, but I do think that sometimes people are asking because they're nosy, and then sometimes people are asking because they really care, they're really interested. Over the course of the last couple of months, every time I've done an Ask Me Anything, I've kept a screenshot of some of the other questions that people have asked that maybe I wasn't so comfortable answering on the format of Instagram stories. But if you've been following me for a while and you care enough to listen to my podcast for 45 minutes to an hour, I feel like you deserve the long-winded answer and the truth of everything. And all of these questions came from people who, when I looked at their profile, it's people that have been following me for a long time. I have history messaging with them back and forth, so I feel like this is for them. I won't name anybody by name, but you guys know who you are. It's a beautiful community that we've been able to create, that I've fostered. It's nice to know that people are out there who I haven't met in person do care about these answers, and I hope they're interesting and maybe a little funny and maybe a little helpful. So I haven't looked at the questions in a minute. So Anthony, let's do it.
Okay, I didn't. This is an actual question I had because I will say, hey, I work with Richie.
Yes.
But they go Rachel.
Yeah. How I got the nickname Richie. Richie is not my government name. My government name on my birth certificate is Rachel Brown. So I have had the nickname Richie since I was a kid. It's a nickname my brother gave me. Richie is not a nickname for Rachel, even though they both start with R. It's just a nickname. And it's a little embarrassing, but funny. The nickname comes from that Macaulay Culkin movie, Richie Rich. And the premise of the movie was that Richie Rich, the kid, was rich and he was very spoiled and had all these things, but he had no friends. So when my brother gave me this nickname, one, I should say, it was before my family was as successful as we are now, but spoiled in that I got a lot of attention from my dad, and I was a little girl. So I got a little bit of attention. Maybe I was spoiled in that way. But at the time when I was younger, I've talked about this on some other episodes, I think. I was bullied. I had good friends, but I wasn't popular. And so I would try to hang out with my brother and all his friends all the time, and he would always make fun of me for not having my own friends. So that is where the nickname Richie originated. And then Instagram came out in college. I was still going by Rachel, and really only people who knew me closely, through my family, would occasionally call me Richie, but I would still introduce myself as Rachel. And then if you knew that my nickname was Richie, would call me that. Then Instagram comes out, and I made my Instagram handle Richie Jolivette. Jolivette is not my government name technically right now. Also because divorce, I actually legally still have my ex-husband's last name. But my Jolivette is my mom's maiden name. I've mentioned before, my parents were divorced and got remarried. So when they were divorced, my mom enrolled me in school with the last name Jolivette, then they got remarried. So then I started using Jolivette Brown, but Jolivette was never necessarily my government legal name, but it was always used in school and on school documents and amongst my family. So Instagram, Richie Jolivette. And I didn't think too much of it, but then I got married, or really I met my ex-husband, and his sister's name was Rachel. Obviously, he did not want to call me his sister's name, but I had a built-in nickname. So again, people who knew me from Instagram would call me Richie, but when I met my ex-husband, he started introducing me as Richie, and it just kind of stuck. And I think it was also maybe 2 years into me living in New York, and I was kind of redefining myself, and I never really felt like a Rachel. The nicknames for Rach is Rach. Rach sounds like a sorority girl who's kind of annoying and probably has bleached blonde hair. Richie is cool, and she probably smokes a little weed, but then she's Richie just sounds cooler and sounds more me and fits my vibe more, I feel like. But professionally, I still use Rachel.
And a side note, when I was approached to do this podcast, Lauren and Keith texted me. He's like, "Oh, my friend Richie."
You thought I was a dude. It actually has helped me a lot to have a boy's name. And because also this all kind of started, I was an entrepreneur at the time, and I'd be cold emailing people. And let's be real, what I was doing, it helped that people thought I was a man. And that helped me get into the door. And I could kind of use one way or the other. Like if I felt like being a woman was going to help me in that situation, I would do things in my email to make it clear that I was a girl, or put usually my email signature would say Rachel in parentheses or in quotes Richie Jolivette Brown. But depending on who it was, I might remove the Rachel.
What are you most insecure about?
Ooh.
This is the next question. This is not this is the internet question. This is not me. I'm not just throwing it.
Anthony wants to know why I'm so insecure. So the word insecurity is not one that I want to really subscribe to in general anymore. There are things that I'm not excited about. I don't really like to just subscribe to the word insecurity, but there are things that aren't my favorite thing about myself. And I would say that these used to be really deep insecurities, and now they're kind of just annoyances or just facts about myself, I would say. And that's not to say some days I don't feel deeply insecure, but I'll say, for one, my skin. I do get lots of compliments on how great my skin is on Instagram, or like when people see me and I have like flawless makeup, but that is not without effort, because I've always had cystic acne. I'm having a breakout right now. I told my producer, I said, I want to kind of like cheat myself this way so you can't see the zit that's over here. But
if the mics went that way, that would be great. I was like, I need you to face forward, please.
But I grew up always having acne, and specifically hormonal acne. And it was never a thing that made me necessarily like, it wasn't as bad to the point where like I couldn't leave the house entirely, but I never felt comfortable leaving the house without makeup. And then around COVID, I really got a handle on my skin. And I remember it was the first time, like 2020 was like my healing era for my skin. And after that, for between 2020 and up until maybe like a year, like about 2 years ago, when I started to have more breakouts, that was the first time in my life I had ever been leaving my house without makeup on and feeling really comfortable and confident. And now in my adult life, like my acne has come back. I'm trying to figure it out, and it is an insecurity. But I also have all of these tools to help me. Center Aesthetics, shout out to them. Also shout out to Dr. Jamie Glick at NYDG, because she is the first one who put me on spironolactone and helped my acne a ton. But that's something that like some days I have as it, and I'm insecure about that. But then that's what fashion's for. That's what hair's for. I will dress it up and distract away so that it's not necessarily an insecurity. It's just more of an annoyance. And then I would say I've, again, in the past been insecure career-wise, and just being a woman and knowing that I've worked so hard to build a life for myself, and very often having the responsibility or the credit of what I've built in my life be given away to other people, people making assumptions that I have what I have because of my parents, or I have what I have because of my ex-husband. And I can't say it's not true in full, right? Because I would not be where I am today without my parents, for example. My parents didn't buy this house for me. My parents didn't, pay for me for it. My parents didn't, have to shell out for student loans, also because I got a scholarship. But when I was in undergrad, I did have a scholarship, and I think it cost about $5,000 to $6,000 a semester for me to go to school with my scholarship. My parents did cover that extra $6,000 so that I didn't have to work. And I know that that's a privilege, but I still earned that scholarship to begin with. And otherwise it would have cost six figures for me to go to Tulane, right? And same with my house. Like, yes, I was married to my ex-husband when I bought this house, and he did contribute to the down payment. I contributed far more to the down payment because I worked my ass off, and I'm really proud of that. And I used to get very, very insecure when I wouldn't get that credit because I felt like people were looking at me like I was small or I wasn't capable or whatever. And then I realized that people are going to think what they're going to think anyway. And the people that are close to me don't care. So why should I care so much? So that insecurity has kind of floated away for me. And now when people ask me that, I'm just like, if they believe me when I say it, great. And if they don't, whatever.
Are you dating? How do you date? I thought this person was like, how do you date in general?
In general.
Like, or how you date. How does Richie
I date?
Yes.
Okay. Am I dating? Yes, I'm dating. I'm assuming they mean like, am I dating someone specific? I am dating someone specific, but I've talked about this in my, in my episode before, I forget which one, I talked about my divorce.
Yeah.
And actually I talked about this with Bryn on her podcast, Please See Below, when we talk about dating like a divorcee. I don't believe I date like a traditional woman does, I would say. So even I jokingly use the term roster, but I don't feel like I have a roster. I feel like I am, if someone comes into my life, I pursue what I feel like works for me. And I think in your 30s, especially post-divorce, I'm not so tied to the end goal, right? If I was tied to, is this relationship going to end in marriage, it'd be different. So like right now, I would say I have a primary person that I'm dating and he's wonderful. It's long distance, but he's very successful. He's got his own thing going. I have my things going. And I feel like it's a really healthy relationship because we're just honest with each other. And I wouldn't put a label on, is it open or unexclusive or like what is, we have life conversations, but we're not necessarily talking about whether or not the two of us are going to end up married together because the status of our relationship hasn't gotten to a point where that would need to be a necessary conversation. I think if you remove the idea that you'd be afraid to end up alone, it changes the timeline of basically every relationship. Because sometimes like the main person I'm dating now, who knows if we end up together, but I do know that he will always be in my life and be a supporter and vice versa. I would be for him. And I do know that no matter what, I can look back on that relationship with him. And if we don't stay together long term and say, this was a good person that I was with, I spent good time with them, and I'm happy with the fact that I spent that time with them. And I feel that way about almost all of my past relationships, to be honest. I think if you listen to my podcast about my breakup that I think that was one of my episodes in February, I had the same view of that relationship. It was heartbreaking to end, but I don't regret anything. And then in terms of dating elsewhere, I don't have a roster. I definitely have dated that way in the past, but if I were to meet someone who sparked my interest, I'll go on a date. And I think the main person that I'm dating, let's say if we're talking rosters, the number one, my MVP on the roster, if I met someone that I felt like, if I met someone where I felt like the relationship could go further than the one that I have with my quote MVP, it's not that I would break up with an MVP or pursue one I would just be honest with both people. And that's what I've done in the past. If the current person I'm dating, if I meet someone else where I think, hey, they might be able to give me something that you're unable to give me right now, and I want to explore that, I can have that open conversation with him and say, this is what I'm looking for. But then he has the power to say whether or not he's down for me to explore that, or if he wants to, that maybe he decides then that's when he decides he wants to be exclusive. And then we'll have that conversation about whether or not that works for the two of us. But in the meantime, it's like a kind of a joke that I say, but I mean it. I'm not going to let my boyfriend stop me from finding my husband. So my second husband, So I date in terms of, I date like an adult. I date like someone who also understands that whoever I'm dating is also an adult and is also looking for their long term. And this is like a little unsolicited advice, but if you are going to be like dating multiple people or really everybody's dating multiple people, unless when that is what dating is, until someone is your boyfriend or your girlfriend, or you've had that conversation that's exclusive, you can assume that if you've gone on 2 dates with someone, then they might have also gone on another date with somebody else that week. And when I have friends that'll be talking about how they're so worried about like, is this guy seeing somebody else, or like who else is like in the running? I'm like, but would you want to have to answer that question for them? Like, do you know for sure that you want to lock in on just this guy and not pursue anybody else? That seems crazy. You've only known him for a week. So I just, even the main guy that I'm dating, I know that he's not maintaining the level of relationship that he has with me with anybody else, right? It would be too difficult for him to. I also trust that if he met someone where that person not only like does come in front of me, but like even could potentially come in front of me, he would tell me that. And just in the same way, look, I'll be honest, I was dating him before I met my ex-boyfriend, but it was a non-exclusive thing. We were still long distance, and when I met my ex, I went to him and I said, "Look, I'm met this person. I'm really enjoying his time. He's looking to be exclusive and to have a certain kind of relationship, and he's able to give me XYZ things that you can't, and I want to see if this is what I want to do." And he was like, great. We no longer had a romantic relationship. We still stayed friends, still stayed in touch. And then I saw that relationship through, because that's what adults do, Easier said than done, I know, but it works.
How do guys get your attention?
How do guys get my attention?
Very severely dyslexic. How do you get a guy's attention?
Oh, okay. How do I get a guy's attention? Confidence. Honestly, any guy I've ever spoken to, like guy friends, like insight that I've gotten above anything else is confidence. So, and just like not caring what the outcome is, kind of the same thing as like you're dating. Like not everybody's gonna like you. So if I want to get a guy's attention, I'm just gonna walk right up to him. And look, sometimes you want to play coy, and in which case, if I want to get a man's attention, maybe I will, maybe I'm gonna ask if he's tall. Okay, if I'm gonna ask if I'm trying to get someone's attention. Examples. If he's tall, I'm going to ask for him to like reach something high, even if it's like a joke. Actually, I did that recently. There was a cute guy at the bar. I didn't have any intentions beyond just being a little flirty for a few minutes while I waited for my friend to get there. And there was nothing above, right? But I looked at this guy and I said, "Oh, you're tall. Can you grab that for me?" Pointed to nothing, right? He laughed. He buys me a drink. We're having a conversation. All you have to do really like to get a man's attention is it's really just showing them that the door is open for them to come in and approach you. So really giving them any sort of like any question, something for them to do, drop your napkin in front of them, ask them for directions, ask them the time. And I guarantee you, I could sit right here with my phone in my hand, knowing the time, and I can say to a man, "Do you have the time?" He's going to give me the time, and he's going to understand that was his in. And if he doesn't react, then okay, moving on to the next.
How much, if at all, do your parents help you with your finances?
Ooh, okay, I remember getting that question too. And that's something people ask me a lot, or it's something people are curious about, and it's like the nosy questions I get. And I would say it usually tends to be less of a question and more of an assumption. My parents are very successful, but that was not the case when I was growing up, right? So I was taught to work hard. I was told that there was no golden parachute, right? There was no retirement plan for me, whatever. I had to make everything for myself. And my parents would help me along the way, meaning getting me opportunities, right? The fact that I was able to graduate without debt. Even when I went to grad school, when I went and got my MBA, I did get a scholarship, but same thing, which is funny because I was married at the time. My ex-husband didn't help me with my tuition, but my parents did. My parents did help me, and it was presented to me as a gift of sorts, but I knew why they were doing it, and it was because at the time my dad didn't want me to have to both work full time and be in school full time. Turns out I also ended up having to be working full time, given some other financial stuff that buying a house and divorce and whatnot. But in terms of help, so this is, you can clearly tell how uncomfortable I am because I never talk about this. I do think it's important to be transparent, especially like living in a city like New York. There are so many people who have outside help and are not honest about it. And I think that's really detrimental because then you have people who are busting their ass and, not understanding why they don't have what somebody else has at the same age and whatnot. In terms of finance, when I first moved to New York, I did have help my parents. When I first moved to New York 10 years ago, I did have help from my parents for my apartment, for my rent. And the way I was helped was my dad knew what my salary was from the job that I had. It was basically nothing. And the conversation was, okay, I would have had to live very far away in an unsafe neighborhood, commuting an hour to and from work if I was in an apartment that I could afford on my salary. So my dad had me write up all my expenses, figure out what it was, and based on how much I was making, he said, okay, you should be spending X amount per X percentage. I think he said like 30%, 40% of your salary on rent. So based on that, I had to live off of 60% of my small salary, but the 30 or 40% of that rent money, my parents made up for the difference between the $1,100 maybe a month that I could afford for rent at the time for me to be in still a small studio apartment, but I was safe. My parents weren't worried about me. I felt safe coming home late at night. And it gave me the opportunity to not have the stress of course I had to make money to live, but I knew that my basic necessities were covered. And that is the level of security my parents have offered me throughout my life, is that I will always have the bare minimum. I'm never going to end up on the street because in the worst possible scenario, I could always move back home. At 32, I don't want to do that, but I could if I needed to. And then after I'd say like 2 to 3 years, I was completely financially efficient on my own. And I say the full 2 to 3 years, not until I could pay my rent, but until, there'd be times in those first, and I'm talking about between the years of like 22 and 25, like there'd be times where maybe a medical expense came up or, I needed to bridge some sort of gap or, there'd be times where I would, for Christmas ask for money for a vacation rather than like something else. And I know that's still a privilege, but it still was my parents didn't get me an apartment, right? And then I bought this house and I was so proud of myself because the money that I had for the down payment, I earned, I'd saved, I've worked my ass off like all through my 20s to be able to do something like this. And when I got divorced, people don't realize divorce is extremely expensive, even if you're amicable, even if you haven't been married for that long. And my divorce attorney bills were a lot, into the 6 figures over the course of the last 3 years. And that's a huge burden on top of caring for myself, my house, and I had to pay out my ex. I knew there was all these things coming. And I had a really frank conversation with my father. Really, he came to me and said, you haven't been asking for help, but like based on what he generally knew about my finances, he knew that it was going to be too much for me to do on my own. And we had a really frank conversation. Part of the situation with my house, right? I put down more money, all these things, but I did have to buy my ex out of my house. And that was on top of all of the attorney's fees. So my parents did help me in terms of buying my ex out of the portion of the property that he owns. So now, rather than being in business with my ex-husband, I'm in business with my dad because I do have this townhouse. It does have an additional unit. So again, it was presented to me as less of it's not a, hey, I'm going to buy you an apartment, have fun. It's okay, we're going to make a responsible business decision together. Even one last example, when I started one of my first businesses, which was called Vetted, it was a luxury travel company and I really enjoyed it. But then COVID hit. Having a travel company during COVID, not the most ideal. But during when I think I've said this on Bryn's podcast on Please See Below. But so when we started this travel company, I started it with my ex-husband. We were just dating at the time. And he was still working full time. I was also working as a real estate agent. And I was kind of like straddling back and forth. I ended up having to pretty much do both for the entirety. My ex ended up quitting his job and going into our travel business full time, which was a big joke my dad made at the wedding, which was, hey, next time if you want to prove to a woman you love her, you don't have to quit your job to do it. Probably not the best way to go. But when we started that business, I was 25, I believe. Yes, I was about 25, and my ex-husband was about 8 or 9 years older than me. So he was much more financially stable at the time. And when we were building the business, there's money that goes into that business fund. So I knew I was going to be putting in more sweat equity, but I knew he had more finances to put in. But when you're making a business deal, sweat equity doesn't always count on paper, especially if you don't have some certain agreements. So it was really important for me to be 50-50 financially on the business as well. Now, I'm going to talk numbers. We needed $50,000 to start the business so that we could plan some trips, do the media, all these things, host an event to start. And he had 25. I wanted to be able to put in 25. Again, I was 25 years old at the time, and having $25,000 to put into a business was really difficult to come around, right? Mind you, I was also like splitting rent with my ex-husband, for I shouldn't, even though he was making a lot more, but it was really important to me to do that. And so I went to my dad, and I think at the time I had like $5,000 that I knew I could use. And so I came to my dad pitching him like Shark Tank for 20,000. And it wasn't a quick phone call. Hey, Dad, can I get 20 grand? Absolutely not. I had to have a full-blown presentation that showed where every dollar was going to go, what the business plan was, where the ROI was coming from, when I had projections for when we'd get this money back and start to be profitable. And I had to do the whole presentation. And after all that, he said, okay, you need 20. I'm going to give you 15 because I think you can make that extra 5. And he did, or I should say, I did make that extra 5. He still ended up giving me the full 20. So I was able to go in with $5,000 more than my ex-husband did. And from then on out, I think it was about 8 months later, I had enough, the business had done well enough for me to be able to pay him back. And instead he said, okay, reinvest that money. And so I reinvested into the business. We did lose a good bit of it during COVID, but then was able to get some of that back. And then I reinvested it into some stocks. It's a privilege to have that kind of access and to have someone around you who intimately who knows how to do what you don't know how to do with money. My dad taught me how to be smart with money. And my adult life has, one, really believed in me and what I'm able to do with my career, with money, with finances and whatnot, and has been willing to bet on me. And it's worked out pretty well for him as well, I'd say. But I also wouldn't be there. I wouldn't be here without him. Even the majority of the money that went into buying this house came from stocks. And a lot of that money from stocks I made, right, on my own, but not really on my own because I had to consult other people. Like, I made a bunch of money off of Tesla stocks. I don't understand cars at all. I don't understand tech, but someone explained it to me, and I knew someone smart enough to explain it to me that I felt comfortable making certain commitments. And I've been privileged now to kind of almost be in business with my dad at times. And I don't look at that as something where he is giving me something. He really is trying to teach me something. And yeah, I wouldn't be here and have all that I have without my parents. But when I say that, I think it gets misconstrued that, oh, I have what I have because they gave it to me. No, I have what I have because they taught me how to get it and what I needed to do to get it. And lastly, I'd say the most privilege I have, and I'm so aware of this, is I have a golden parachute. a lot of people who are entrepreneurs, it is really make or break. And it is, if I'm going to invest all this money into this company and I'm going to work my ass off and it still might not make it. And if it doesn't make it, I'm on the street, right? I am so blessed. I've never had that fear. I've definitely felt fear of failing and being embarrassed and having to start over and all these things. But I know that if I fall on my ass, there is someone to pick me back up. And I know that it's a privilege, but it's also something that I feel like fuels me to take certain leaps and take certain steps, because otherwise it's kind of a waste, isn't it? You know?
When did you know your marriage was over? What were the signs?
I get that question a lot from women, and funny enough, it's typically not married women. It's women who are dating because they're worried that they might miss some signs. And what I'll tell you is, I knew long before I was even engaged, but I was so young, I wasn't willing to really believe it. And I knew that we weren't compatible as a married couple, and I knew he wasn't a husband, but in my head, I still ended both those sentences with yet. And I mistakenly believed that things would get better. And also I was a much different person, and I was in denial, and I was much more concerned with people pleasing than anything else. So, and I have a very good relationship with my ex-husband now. He knows all these things. We've chatted and whatnot about all of it, but maybe one day I'll get him on the podcast. But I remember walking down the aisle and thinking in my head, if I could just stay married for 3 years, because 3 years in my head felt like enough time where people would think I tried hard and wouldn't ask too many questions. And I don't know why I felt that way, because I was trying very hard otherwise, but it just felt like this snowball I couldn't stop. And what people didn't realize, I got married legally in 2020 and had my wedding in 2021. And when I got married in 2020, it was with like 8 days notice. And that's something that only like a handful of my friends even know. And that is because when we got engaged, then I already knew I wasn't sure about the longevity of that relationship, because we were already having a lot of problems and we had just started a business together. And it wasn't that I didn't see him as my husband at all. It was just, I knew there were things that needed to change before he could be a husband. And I wanted those things to change before I committed. And when he proposed, we had a conversation, and I told him I wanted a 2-year-long engagement because I wanted to really take the time to decide if we were fit for each other before making that whole commitment and starting the planning and spending the money. We booked the venue a full 2 years in advance, because I knew if I'm getting married in New Orleans, 1, I knew I'd wanted it 2 years out, and 2, I knew it needed to be in October because of the weather in New Orleans, and 3, I knew I was going to get married at the Audubon Tea Room because we had talked about that since I was a kid. So we booked that, and then I thought, we're going to put it out of our minds, and like in a year's time, we'll think about it. We had just started our business. We had all these trips planned. And then 2 months later, COVID hit. Everything stopped. And all anybody could focus on was planning this wedding, because it was the only exciting thing for people to look forward to. And then it was, the COVID itself really heightened a lot of things. And it was like, okay, is it still bad from before, or is it only bad because it's COVID? And I knew the real answer. I just didn't want to believe it because I knew how difficult it would be to end it. We had a business together. We were living together. Now we've proposed and we're making all these plans and people are talking about it. It just felt like this big snowball. And then I found this house, bought it, and I had a little mini panic. And I don't know if I ever even told my ex-husband this, but the real reason he wanted to get legally married was because he knew we were buying this house, and for tax reasons and stuff, said it would be much better if we could do our taxes together. Given it was COVID, he went back to work and I was in school. I said, okay, that makes sense. I'm a financially literate person. It did make sense on paper to do that. And I thought to myself, now that we bought this house, it's probably better we need to get married for that reason. It just wasn't as romantic of a decision to like for that part. And we got married 8 days notice on Zoom. My mom called a friend who is a federal judge who was able to do it for us, and great. And then there was nothing, it didn't feel like meaningful in the same way as like a wedding. And I thought that was a good thing until we start planning the wedding. And then I'm like, well, I can't cancel this. I might as well have this wedding and try because I'm already legally married to him anyway. And it was just this big snowball that I couldn't stop. And so I knew before, like, you'll know, just listen to your gut. And it's not a small sound from your gut, right? So it's honestly less that I would say if you're asking that question because you want to know what you would see, it's less of a question of whether or not you see the signs. It's more of a question of whether or not you're going to convince yourself that it's not a red flag. If you're going to make excuses, because I would all day be like, yeah, well, he's like this, but he's just so stressed from work right now. Or like, oh, this is happening, but like, he's just got a lot on his plate. Or like, oh, this happened or that happened. You're making excuses for why they're doing this behavior is happening or why they're not there for you or whatever is going on. If you're sitting there and making a lot of excuses for your partner, you're lying to yourself. That's your sign. Your sign isn't coming from them. It's coming from you.
The final question is, do you ever want to get married again?
Yes, I do. I would say that's a question I get definitely asked all the time, because the assumption is that if you get divorced, especially divorced that quickly, that like you might be burned from marriage. But really that's why I got divorced so quickly, is because I do believe in the sanctity of marriage, right? But actually it gets a little more complicated, because when I say I believe in the sanctity of marriage now has two different parts, right? There's the commitment of marriage, meaning I'm marrying you because I want to commit my life to you long term, and we're going to be with each other no matter what. And then there's marriage legally, like we're going to get into these legal documents. If we get divorced, this is how property gets divided and blah, 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 right? Puck is bored with this conversation. So there's these two pockets, right, of marriage. When it goes to the commitment part, I absolutely want that. Am I in a rush for it? No, because we have our whole lives to settle down and be committed long term and not die alone, right? But I definitely 100% want that. That is, I am naturally more of a commitment person. I'm a long-term person. That is what I want. When it comes to the legal part of marriage, it's not that I don't want it. It just depends if it's appropriate, right? I think in some situations it might not be. Who knows? I don't know if I want kids. If I never have kids with my partner, does it mean we have to get married? Maybe within the next couple of years, I make a whole bunch of money and I have my finances here. I don't need to blend them. Like, who knows? I'm not attached to the legal part of marriage, because also there's other ways to legally bind yourself. There's domestic partnership. You can go into a business relationship. You buy a house with your long-term partner. You can put it in an LLC that you both are 50-50 owners of. All these legal things you can do in other ways. It doesn't have to be in the form of a marriage contract, right? And then in terms of a long-term commitment, that's the thing. Like a marriage, a legal document, that divorce exists. A legal document is not what's going to keep someone with you long term. Someone being a committed person is what's going to do that. So that is what I definitely want for myself long term. The legal document of it all kind of just depends. Take it or leave it. Is that a good answer?
You did a great job. Not easy.
Yeah. Those were personal, but I think, again, I'm an open book, so I'm happy to continue to answer questions like this. I think we can do this again sometime soon. I'll just keep screenshotting the more like personal or in-depth questions you guys have on Ask Me Anything. But I hope that my answers gave you some clarity, some advice, maybe if nothing else, just a little bit of a laugh. Yeah, I will see you guys next week on another episode of the It Girls Guide.